Previously on Funny Science Fiction.
Well, sometimes it's the missing the mark on funny that can be funny. So either way, we're gonna laugh.
Hi, I'm Michael Cerverus, and you're listening to the Funny Science Fiction Podcast.
The podcast where we talk about extremely important world events, just not of this world and not anything real. Our guest today is a veteran actor of stage and screen. In 1993, he was nominated for his first Tony for the show Tommy. Now, he won his first Tony Award in 2004 in the Broadway show Assassins, playing the role of the infamous John Wilkes Booth. Now, with a bio that's this diverse, we are excited to welcome the one, the only, Michael Cerverus to Funny Science Fiction. Hello, Michael.
Hey, y'all.
Glad to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining.
I'm delighted to be here.
He says that now.
He says that. Give him time.
I'm delighted to be here now.
We will check back in 45 minutes to see if you still are.
All right. So, Michael, you have been a part of some pretty cool sci-fi universes. You were the Observer in Fringe, along with a couple other titles in that show. Of course, Ramses the Fourth and Tick on Amazon. You were Professor Pig in Gotham. And even a part of the MCU as Elias Starr in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So, with setting the tone there for that, and the reason why I mentioned those shows is because typically we like to find out what were people's sci-fi influences growing up that led them to a life of sci-fi in the future. So, go take it. What were your favorites?
Where
that was
did
a
I
horrible
go
lead into that question, but we're going to go with it anyway.
Well, I absolutely grew up, a sci-fi and fantasy and horror film devotee from early days. I grew up in Huntington, West Virginia, and I remember two things especially. I remember staying up on Friday nights for Chiller Theater once I was allowed to somewhat determine my own bedtime. And of course, the best movies on Chiller Theater, of course, they started, I guess, at probably 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. And the best ones were usually the second or third ones. So I remember staying up and I was exhausted and I was just a little kid, but I was determined to see, the Universal Mummy and Creature from the Black Lagoon and all of those black and white films. So I remember going into the bathroom like at commercial breaks to splash water on my face so I would stay up long enough to see like the really good ones. And then I also remember having a subscription to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, and just being devouring those stories of all of the behind the scenes stuff of all of my favorite horror films and sci-fi films. So I don't think that I ever imagined when I was a kid that I would actually get to be participating in any of these worlds. But I was always in love with it, and I was a total comic book kid. I was mostly a Marvel kid for the most part. I was
Awesome.
a big Spider-Man fan, and Fantastic Four and X-Men were big favorites of mine as a kid. So I was absolutely immersed in all of that. I didn't ever imagine a career path that would put me in some of those worlds, but I've been thrilled every time it has.
Yeah, you've had some really cool roles. And we say this a lot, when we're talking to our guests, especially in the sci-fi world, because there's opportunity for makeups and prostheses and all these different things where you don't necessarily know it's that person. Like, for instance, I didn't realize that you were Professor Pig in Gotham. Like, so when I'm going through your list, I'm going down, I'm scrolling through, I'm like, oh, he was Professor Pig. That dude was kind of messed up, but that's cool. All right.
I think the most unrecognizable one is a movie I did called Cirque du Freak, Vampire's Assistant, where I played Mr. Tiny, and that was the most prosthetic stuff that I had. And the really cool thing about that was that the FX makeup guys, one of them had been sort of trained by direct line from Roy Harryhausen's
Oh wow.
shop and stuff,
Ooh.
and the people who did the life cast to make the stuff. When I went to their office to get the sort of Head and Shoulders life cast done, there was the Predator exoskeleton thing was there, and like they had done just all of these amazing sci-fi things that I had seen, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be like in the same place where all of this stuff came from. So I'm a total geek and dork and fan in the midst of all of it.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
But that's why you're here. That's why we get to talk to you, is because we are also the total geeks and dorks. We just
Fantastic.
don't get to be in the middle of it yet. So the three of us have our set roles here. Tim is our mainstream Star Wars MCU Funko guy. Nick has a tendency to know more about the obscure sci-fi and the novels, and I'm the one who's into musicals because I'm a weirdo. But we'll get more into your musical history later,
Okay.
which is fantastic. I mean, you're a Tony Award winner, but sorry, I'm okay. So what's the difference for you between preparing for a role on stage, whether you're singing or performing Shakespeare, and preparing for a role for television or film?
Well, I think there are obviously technical differences. If you're going into a musical, there's music to learn. There are songs to figure out, and that's a whole skill set in itself. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing if you're doing a play, I think the main difference from working on something on camera is that you sort of get this extended period to work and develop and explore, and you get time in rehearsal every day to try to go at it this way and see where that takes you, and then the next day you can sort of try it a different way, and that's a really valuable, cool, creative process to go through. To be honest, I enjoy the rehearsal process as much as I do the performance process. In fact, when I'm happiest in a performance of a long run of a show, it's when it still feels like we're still rehearsing and discovering things and working on things. We're just doing it now in front of a paid audience, Mm-hmm. And when you work in front of the camera, you seldom get much time for rehearsal. I mean, I have done things where there was time for rehearsal before you get to the set, but that's the exception more than the rule these days. And even when you get to do that, it's like a day or something. So a lot of the work that you're doing, you're really doing on the fly and on your feet. But that's also cool because it makes you make bold first choices, because you may not get to try too many different things. So so I try to kind of take things from both worlds and apply them where I can. But I think the fundamental sort of approach that I have to exploring a character is kind of the same no matter what the medium is, and that's starting from the script and starting from what the writer has put on the page and seeing just how much I can dig out of that, including things like, what do other characters say about my character, not just what does my character say, or what does my character not say, or what do other characters not say about my character, or what is it about the way that my character talks that tells me something about the way he thinks. And I think that's kind of true no matter what medium the character is in.
Right. Do you find yourself preferring one or the other? If you're given the option of, hey, we have a movie we want you to do, or hey, we have a Broadway show we want you to do, do you have one you usually lean toward?
Well, for the longest time, I did so much stage. I was really fortunate to get to do, sort of back to back or one after another, long runs of really exciting, challenging, interesting shows on stage. And I loved that. And I was really grateful for it. It also is exhausting, and it takes up every moment of your life for long stretches of time, if you're lucky. And it wasn't like I determined to change that at all. It's just uh, television and film opportunities started to come up, and they were really cool and things that I hadn't done before. And I think the main thing about that I can say with some consistency about my career is whatever I have just done, I'm interested in doing something different next. So, when I kind of crest one hill, I'm looking for the next hill or mountain to kind of climb. So if I've just finished doing a play, I'm going to be more interested in doing something on screen. Or if I've just done a musical, I'm going to be more interested in doing, a straight play or something. And I think at heart, I'm kind of a creature of the stage, but it's been like 5 years or so since Fun Home closed, and that was the last performance I did on stage. And I'm sure, I hope that I'll go back at some point.
Right.
But I'm really enjoying this extended stay in front of a variety of cameras.
It's really cool.
I wanted to highlight one thing that you mentioned, and I don't know that if this is something that other actors do or don't, but I think it's the first time that anybody's ever mentioned it to us, was the looking at their character from the context of others. And I find that really striking, because it makes complete sense to me, is that you get a fuller picture of who and what you're supposed to be moving forward with that character. Because I don't think that anybody, because we've asked this question in a variety of different ways over the course of our episodes, but I don't think anybody else has ever mentioned that.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, some people may do it kind of instinctively and not even think about the fact that they're doing it to mention it. But I do think it's interesting, because as an actor, your job really is to fight your character's point of view. Mm-hmm. And if you have a good director and, good writer and good people to work with, then you can focus just on doing that and arguing for your character's point of view. And the story will be handled and crafted by the people whose job it is to do that. It gets tricky when you find yourself in a situation where you feel like, I need to also be kind of monitoring the directing side of things or the writing side of things, because that's not really being considered completely. And I haven't had that experience very often, because I've been really lucky to work with just top flight people who you can just go, you have this under control, so I'm just going to do my job, which is think of the world the way my character sees it. But when I'm starting to work, I think you are kind of doing two things at once. You're looking for that point of view, your character's point of view, but you also are trying to understand. I think what's really valuable about looking at your character from other characters and even the audience's point of view is it helps you understand your role in the totality of the thing, and it helps you understand where you fit, what piece of the puzzle you need to provide when you understand the whole thing from the outside of just your own personal viewpoint.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to say congrats on getting those 2 Tony Awards. That's definitely an accomplishment.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate that. Thanks.
And as an accomplished Broadway performer, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think to be recognized by, your peers and people that you admire. I'm not under any illusion that, that I'm better than the other people that I was nominated with. And, I'm very clear about all the factors that go into why one person's name gets called on a given evening. And I think it's, understandable, but a bad idea to believe that elevates you in some way, among your peers. What's really great about awards is that sense of being recognized for the work the heart and soul that you put into something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think is true for anybody, like anyone who is told by people that they admire or look up to or measure themselves against. Anytime you're told, yeah, we saw what you did and we really find it worth, acknowledging, that's really meaningful, I think.
Mhm.
And it's the kind of thing that can help you, especially when you're in the early parts of your career or developing as an actor. There's so much self-doubt that's a part of, the creative life, and so many opportunities to feel self-conscious or not certain that how you even got here and how much longer till they realize and like show you.
Right.
So anytime that something like that happens where you feel like, oh, okay, maybe maybe I do belong here a little bit, and maybe I have earned a right to stand here, that can be a big weight off your shoulders. And it's not a one-way street. It's not like you just climb the ladder and it gets better and better. Like if you've spent any time in the creative world, it's like a few steps up and then 5 steps backwards and then a few forwards again, and then some sideways that you didn't even anticipate. So I've tried to really sort of have a good perspective on what that all means, but also to allow myself to enjoy what's really cool about, hearing your name called in a room full of people that you look up to.
Right.
Excellent. Yeah, validation makes sense to me.
Totally. And that can happen in any walk of life, and I wish we spent more time looking around and saying to people around us, hey, I just want you to know, like, I saw how hard you worked on that thing and it's really great and you should be proud of it,
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's something that I've tried to do in my parenting. I have a 3-year-old, and that is a big thing with the, hey, you did a really good job with that, because you do want to instill that self-confidence in her. You want her to know, hey, I did a cool thing. I did a good thing. I can do that again. And I feel like we don't get that enough as humans, especially as adults. We don't get it. We get it when we're kids, and then you graduate from high school and they're like, okay, bye.
Yeah. And it's really important to develop that skill for yourself and to be able to take some time and say, hey, I just need to take a minute and recognize how hard I worked on that. And maybe I didn't get everything that I thought I was going to from it, but I'm really proud of myself for working so hard,
Right. It's fun when it comes around from the 3-year-old too. She saw one of our podcast interviews and she's like, Mom, that was a really good one. I'm like, well, thanks. From a 3-year-old, that's high
We'll
praise.
take it.
Absolutely.
Hey, that's my age group. I'm rocking it. So let's go for it.
Your target demographic.
Exactly.
3-year-olds are the best.
So speaking of, hey, you did a thing and it was really good. You have released 3 albums up to this point, 3 rock albums. Now the most recent being 2020, Hinterlands. And I was listening to some of that. And I have to be honest with you, the song Power Lines, the very first track on the album, reminded me so much of a band called Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Really?
And I listened to that song about 3 times in a row because I the first time I was like, boy, that sounds like Toad. And I'm a big fan of Toad the Wet Sprocket. And I don't know if they're part of your musical background or not, but I could see them like performing that song. I could see them doing that. It totally and easily fits their vibe. So just kudos to you. It's a really cool album. It's been added to my Apple playlist.
Oh, awesome.
But yeah, I really, really enjoyed that. So guys, if you're listening, please go check out Hinterlands by Michael Cerveris. You will not be disappointed. And it's a really cool album. He has 2 others as well. I made it through one of them. I was starting it on the second one today, or the third. Yeah, the second one of the 3 today, but I haven't had really an opportunity to listen to that one. But far,
they're all kind of different. I mean, there are things that sort of tie them together, but Hinterlands actually was the first of the 3, but it was the last to be released. And
oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know of Toad the Wet Sprocket, and I know some of their stuff, but I don't know them super well. When I was doing it, I was living in London at the time, and I recorded this in Scotland with some friends of mine who have a band called Teenage Fan Club, um, and I kept thinking, this is my attempt to be Oasis, that because that was what was happening in London at the
Gotcha.
time, and
Okay.
that song was like, I think if I'm honest with myself, this is me, trying to pretend that I'm in Oasis. Um, but but that's really cool that you heard those and like them. I really love recording, and I love writing music and recording music. I haven't done a solo record in a while. I've mostly been working with my band Loose Cattle for the last several years. That's been my major
Okay.
musical direction lately.
So let's keep talking about music here for a second. So we talked about your sci-fi influences. What are some of your musical influences when you were younger that really like piqued your ears up and made you like, pay attention a little bit more?
Well, they're kind of all over the place, to be honest.
Love it.
First of all, I grew up with a father who is a classical pianist and music professor in university. So I went to bed as an infant hearing my father practicing Chopin and Beethoven and Bach, and I, I was growing up in a pre-MTV, pre-internet world with no older siblings in West Virginia, so I discovered music for the most part from the radio. But 70s FM radio was a pretty varied thing even in West Virginia. So I like my first 45 that I bought was the Jimmy Castor bunch, the Bertha Butt Boogie. So
Yeah.
this little West Virginia white kid was like grooving
Nice.
to some deep funk stuff early on.
Nice.
But at the same time, I was, I remember, I used to be really embarrassed that this was my first concert experience, but I've now become really proud of the fact that the first live concert I ever went to with my friend Scott and his parents was the Carpenters in a arena
I
show.
love the Carpenters.
Yeah, they're amazing, and I
are.
saw Karen Carpenter play drums, and it was amazing. But then I was a huge Deep Purple fan and REO Speedwagon, and I was always trying to find stuff that I could sort of show to my dad and say, well, look, these guys are legitimate, serious musicians, because he didn't really have a lot of regard for rock music.
Oh, sure.
So anytime there was Kansas, I was a big fan of Kansas because they had a violin player. So I could, say to my dad, look, they have a classical instrument in the band. Or Emerson, Lake and Palmer did pictures at an exhibition.
Yeah.
And I brought that into him, and he said, yeah, why don't they just play the Mussorgsky? Why are they putting electric guitars in this? So very much like a prog rock kid.
Awesome.
It was interesting because I came to things like The Who a little later than they were actually happening, because stuff took a little longer to trickle down to West Virginia. But it meant that a lot of music that became very formative for me and very important in my life, like The Who, for example, or, punk music. And I was went through a big Britpop phase. And
Sure.
and I found it wasn't just the soundtrack of my growing up. It was like music I heard and then really dug into, instead of it just kind of going on in the background while I was making all my, teenage mistakes and stuff. So I think I listened a little more than I might have if I'd actually had the wealth of music that you have today. That kids just have to kind of hit a button and they can hear anything they want to. So there was that on the one hand, and then like folk and country music that was happening in West Virginia. So all over the place.
I love the varied interests with music. My grandmother was a classically trained opera singer. My mom got me into piano lessons and voice lessons when I was little, but my mom still has her Carpenters vinyls from when they were brand new. Like, she's still got them in their beautiful packaging. She loves Carpenters. But then, like, I've got 2 older brothers and an older sister. So my older brothers introduced me to Bowling for Soup and all of these like punk bands,
Right.
and Avenged Sevenfold and 3 Days Grace. And it's like, I went from Jimmy Buffett and Carpenters and Simon and Garfunkel to 3 Days Grace. And then 4 years ago, my husband and I actually went and saw Kansas in person in Saginaw. It was an amazing concert. It was absolutely spectacular. But I love that you can get all of those different varieties of music to help grow who you are as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at, you know, the path of my career, it's as meandering as my musical tastes are. So.
But that's always fun, because then when you hit shuffle on your music library and you go from Britpop to Broadway musicals to rap or whatever shows up next.
No, I love eclectic music taste. My iTunes catalog used to go for, and still does. I mean, I shouldn't say used to. You could be listening to Perry Como one moment and then be listening to Megadeth the next. So you know, it's going to bounce between the two. So
good music is good music.
Absolutely,
it is. So kind of bouncing off of Tim's question, according to the internet and my research, you played lyric guitar, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, but we'll get to that, when you had the title role of Sweeney Todd during the 2005 production. So first of all, what is a lyric guitar?
I don't know. That sounds like one of those, like, you know, critic writer terms that doesn't seem to mean a lot. I mean,
about right.
We played the lyric guitar.
Yes. I mean, I suppose maybe the point they were trying to make was that the guitar work was kind of more melodic and gentle, as opposed to the bloodthirsty acting work that I was doing. Because I think that is kind of true, that, you know, I wasn't like hammering away at power chords when I was playing Sweeney Todd, you know.
Okay, that makes sense. So what kind of preparation did you have to get into the character Sweeney Todd? Because obviously he's crazy, but he's also oddly sympathetic.
Well, I had, the chief preparation was the fact that on my first ever trip to New York with my family, my dad, who was a huge Sondheim fan at that time, already took the family to see our first Broadway show. And it was one of the late previews of the original Sweeney Todd on Broadway. So that was like my introduction to Broadway, to, you know, the Broadway on Broadway. And I was just blown away. And the whole family was, and we had the cassette in the station wagon and would listen to it on every family trip. And we could sing every single note of it. And I subsequently went back to see it, because then I went to school up in, I guess, my last year of high school, I was at Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. And I guess it would have been there, from there. And I guess also even college, I guess, freshman year maybe, that I came back. Man, it would have been, maybe the end of high school and beginning of college. Anyway, I saw the show on Broadway 7 times with Glenn Cariou and with Glenn. George Hearn. And so I knew it inside out and had for years. And then when the opportunity to do it came up, I was kind of surprised, because I would have expected I wouldn't get a chance to even think about playing Sweeney Todd, if ever, until later in my career. But our production was thankfully very true to the spirit of what Sondheim wrote. But it was a very different concept than what Hal Prince had so memorably made. And we all had seen that and all, you know, revered it. But there was no way I was going to be able to compete with my memory of George Hearn or Len Cariou. So luckily, it was a very different thing, and I could kind of develop my own idea of Sweeney. And And it's interesting what you say about him being, you know, almost sympathetic, because I think that goes back to the thing we were talking about earlier, where, you know, I think of my job as fighting my character's point of view. And when you think, okay, well, here's a guy who was just going about his business, and then, you know, the legal system grabs him, throws, you know, makes up a charge to ship him off to Australia because the judge has ulterior motives. And he comes back, I think, really just intending to get his wife and daughter back and then disappear maybe somewhere up north. And if it weren't for the meddling of Mrs. Lovett, maybe that's what would have happened. But that's clearly not what happens, or we have no musical. And,
you have no meat pies if you don't have Mrs. Lovett.
You have no meat pies. And I think, you know, so like I was saying, like if you're playing, no matter how villainous the behavior of the character you're playing is, everybody thinks of themselves as the hero of their own story. Nobody, very seldom does a person think of themselves as the bad guy. So, you know, in Sweeney's mind, the things he did, he felt he had to do or was justified to do. And, you know, I leave it to the writers and the director to kind of make sure the audience knows that this is not the path to choose for one's life.
Right.
And I can then just sort of make the argument that I think is always more interesting. And this is something I think I probably got from watching, you know, those Boris Karloff in Frankenstein, where I always sympathized with the monsters. You know, I always felt like Frankenstein didn't ask to be put together and, you know, shoved into this world. And, you know, Godzilla didn't ask to be woken up by a nuclear bomb. And King Kong was perfectly happy on his island and would have been totally cool if it weren't for meddling people. So I always feel like it's an easy thing. If a character's just evil, we can dismiss him and not have to ask ourselves, you know, what part of me is like that, and what does this character, you know, what's the author trying to make me look at in my life or in society, or, you know, whatever. I think it's so much more interesting when you can get the audience to go, well, okay, I mean, I think it's probably not good that, you know, people go around shooting presidents, but I do see how the society around us maybe contributes to some of what happens. It's not just that people are crazy, you know, and that gives us something to take away and think about, you know.
Because John Wilkes Booth would be a really hard character to play because he is so historically hated. There is so much hatred toward him, and in popular culture even he's still talked down about. But trying to play him as a character would be difficult to try to get into that.
Well, it's interesting. I love to do research. So when I'm playing a real life character, it's really cool because, you know, there often is detailed historical stuff that you can dig up. And I found a book of his letters that included, for one thing, it just sort of helped me contextualize, you know, he was an actor like me, and acting was very different in some ways, but in other ways, it's always been kind of the same. And so part of these letters were about arrangements for going to do Hamlet in Chicago or whatever. So that kind of humanized him as a person. And then this also included this manifesto that he had written in anticipation of what was originally supposed to be just a kidnapping of Lincoln, and that went tragically the wrong way. But I also discovered something I hadn't known, which was that at the time, Lincoln was as unpopular as some of our, you know, presidents in recent memory have been, and where the country clearly was very divided. And Booth believed that he was going to be hailed as a hero for the actions that he did, and he had reason to think that would be true. Like, there were plenty of people who sort of felt that until it actually happened, and then suddenly, you know, it was a different kind of thing. So if you take away the horrible criminal tragic act that we know he's responsible for later, and look at him up until that point, as somebody who's saying the country's not what it was, and the people in charge are tyrants, and it's not, these days especially, it's not hard to find real life examples of that point of view on whichever side you find yourself on. So yeah, it is difficult when you look at him just as this monolithic bad guy. But when you really start looking at the details and really start looking at the facts, you realize, wow, it's much more complicated than that. And he actually was a human being. And
when you get more than they teach you in history class in high school.
Absolutely. And that's what's great about the arts, because it fills in gaps or gives context and humanizes a lot of history. And as we know, those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat
it. Yes.
Right. So we all have, like, you've worked really hard at your characters, and I'm pretty sure they're all near and dear to your heart. And is there like a role or a hidden gem of yours that you're especially proud of that we should go watch?
That's so hard because, like you say, like, I've been very fond and protective of lots of the characters that I've played. I would say some of the ones that really stand out, Hedwig, when I played Hedwig off Broadway and in LA and London, that's a kind of all-consuming character, and especially at the time was really a groundbreaking kind of show and meant a lot to a lot of people, and that I'm really proud to have been part of that legacy. In the same way, Fun Home, playing Bruce Bechtel, who also conveniently ties me back into the graphic novel comic world through Alison Bechdel's original book. That was kind of every aspect of that was like the ideal job for me, because it was a piece of literature that I just have enormous respect for. It was a creative team that I really, really admire. It was a cast that I love and still feel very connected to. And on top of all of the great things that happened career-wise from it, and the Tony Award and everything else, really more what it meant to the audiences who came to see it, who saw themselves on stage for the first time, or understood things about themselves or their families, whether their stories were at all like the Bechtels or not. It's just every family has some kind of complicated relationship that can find echoes, I think, in that piece. So that's something I'm super, super proud to have been a part of. And then things like a few years ago, somebody sent me some sci-fi magazine, I can't remember which one, that did a list of I think maybe it was his 60th anniversary or something. So it was like the 60 or 50 top most iconic characters in sci-fi. And September was well up there on the list. And that, to me, was one of the coolest things to sort of recognize that I got to play a part of creating this kind of indelible character that people really, embraced and cared about, and that stands up over time. And I'm really proud of that whole show. And I think it's one of those things that will continue to be discovered by generations of people.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
All right. So we recently, as in last month or so, had an opportunity to talk with your fellow castmate and Pyramid Gang member Joshua Schubart here on the show. We had a great time with Josh. Just heck of a guy. But we talked with him about his very first scene on The Tick, where he runs in breathless and you give him a nice pop on the back. Now, for Josh, this was a huge deal because he grew up a fan of The Tick. So I want to know, what was your favorite part about getting to smack Josh?
Well, there's so many. I mean, there's the sound it made. There's the firmness of he's got a very firm back, Josh, and you can really lean in to whacking him on the back.
There you go. All right, so serious question. I had to ask that because we talked about that a little bit with Josh as well. But how hard is it to play a bad guy who takes himself seriously but can't be taken seriously?
It's so fun because I play so many like dark characters where I'm basically, disemboweling myself for the pleasure of the audience on a given day. So to actually get to be funny, and the great thing, of course, is the more seriously you take it, the funnier it is when you have great writing like we had on that show. So I just had such a blast every second I was part of that show. Partly just trying to keep a straight face with, Peter and Griffin in those suits was, or anybody who had to talk to me wearing a gold velour tracksuit, it's like we all had our crosses to bear in that show.
Well, that's always been one of the great things about The Tick is that it never takes anything too seriously.
And yet it's very sincere at the same time, which I think is what is so sweet and wonderful about it. It's really, it says really sweet things about friendship and family relationships and all kinds of stuff. And yet it's completely irreverent all the time, including about itself.
Absolutely.
So between John Wilkes Booth, Professor Pig, Sweeney Todd, and Ramses the Fourth, you have quite the villainous streak going on. So have you thought about switching sides?
I don't know what people are trying to tell me. I like to think that maybe I just, hopefully I'm a nicer, better, more evolved person because I'm working through all this stuff. Shoot presidents and bake people into pies and chop them up.
So are there any heroic roles that you would be interested in if you had your choice, or are you enjoying being the bad guy?
Well, I mean, I do enjoy being a bad guy because those characters so often are the most interesting, complex characters. But yeah, I would like to, get the girl instead of, chopping her up. And I would like to live happily ever after instead of never quite making it to the end credits of anything I'm in. But it doesn't seem to be my lot in life. And I don't, like I say, I don't know what that says about me or people's opinion of me or what. But, I try not to take it too personally.
We actually recently talked with Armin Shimmerman, who was Quark on Deep Space Nine, and he mentioned that he's had a lot of villain roles too. And Tim had this theory that it's the Shakespearean actor, it's the Shakespeare in you that has made it so that you become this villain, because you're used to the long drawn out Shakespearean soliloquies that we know and love, and villains are notorious for that.
Yeah, and you just think someday some villain is going to figure out if you just cut that thing in half, you would kill the hero before everybody else.
Stop talking and get to the murder.
Just,
you'd be fine.
I often
Armin and I. I think you're absolutely right about the Shakespearean thing. I think there is, and maybe it's our distrust of hyper-educated seeming people that we figure if you can handle classical verse, you must be evil.
Right.
Possibility.
If you can say all of that without breaking character.
Right.
I often think that you mentioned just getting to the point of killing him. I often think about Austin Powers, where him and Scott are standing there, and Scott just wants to pull out the gun. He's like, I got a gun in my room. I'll go get it. We can cap them together. And instead he has to sit there and go through this long, drawn out, story to Austin about how Dr. Evil, about how he's going to kill him. That just popped in my head.
$1 million.
Right?
Exactly.
It is funny the number of times that it's like, if you just shut up.
Just stop.
Just do it already.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to be here for
Why do you need to explain to him everything that he already knows?
He was just there.
He was just there.
So our Facebook group has over 165,000 members, and it's just filled with memes of this mixed with this, and so which two of your characters would you like to see come together to either rule the world together or to become nemesis?
Well, I think Mr. Tiny and Professor Pig would be an amazing dynamic duo. Obviously, between Professor Pig's skill in the kitchen and ability to kind of pretend to be a French chef among his many different guises, and the fact that clearly Mr. Tiny loves to eat, I think on that level alone they're really kind of simpatico. And they both have such a flair for the dramatic and the theatrical. I think that would be a pretty amazing. I can't imagine it ending well, but it would be pretty amazing to watch.
No.
Interesting.
I was thinking Professor Pig and Sweeney Todd.
I mean, kind of similar.
Yeah,
reasons,
but they're kind of cut on the same cloth. So I like the idea of yours where there's almost a
symbiotic relationship.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. I
Got your back, Tim.
I kept having the thought of parasitic, but I'm like, no, that's just one side benefiting. So thank you.
I think some of my characters probably would have a parasitic relationship with each other.
All right, Michael, we're at a point in our show where we like to run our guests through a little bit of a quiz. So today, for your listening and participating pleasure, we have a quiz called Broadway Meets Sci-Fi.
Awesome.
All right, so it's 5 questions. Each question is multiple choice. Okay, so so we'll help you out a little bit there. If you get 3 of the questions correct, we would like to send you one of these awesome I Gave to the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans coffee mugs.
Awesome.
If you get 4 questions correct, we'd like to send you that coffee mug along with this book written by the founder of our Facebook group called Dances with Aliens. It's all about a dog at a theme park, but it's not a real dog. It's a man in a dog suit hiding from aliens, and how they can't recognize a guy in a dog suit.
This sounds tailor-made for me. So I really need to get 5 right.
So you only need 4 to get that. So
awesome.
So yeah, so if you get 4, we'll send you that. If you get 5, we'll send you his other book that started the group called Custodians of the Cosmos, which is all about something similar to Star Trek, but not quite Star Trek, where a young man wanted to join something quite like Star Trek Federation, but washed out, and instead became a custodian so he could boldly clean up after those who boldly just went.
It's totally Star Trek, but not Star Trek because copyrights.
Exactly. We don't have enough money for them to sue us. So anyway,
that's because we have no money.
That's the next point. Yeah. So, however, if you get less than 3 correct, we'd like to take your picture, make a meme out of you, and put it into our group. We call it our fun sequence. Are you okay with that?
I'm totally okay with that.
All right, fantastic. Take it away, Nick.
This actor may be best known for his time as Doogie Howser and Barney Stinson, and also Count Olaf and Dr. Horrible. Is it Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Neil Patrick Harris, or Bob Saget?
Neil Patrick Harris.
You're correct.
My co-star in Assassins.
Yes.
There you go.
All right, number 2. This actor sang about his summer loving, his grease lightning, and eventually became a saint. Howard Saint in The Punisher. Was that A, John Goodman, B, John Cleese, or C, John Travolta?
John Travolta, I guess, right?
It is John Travolta.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 2 for 2.
Cool.
This actor showed us that on a tiger can wear a necktie on any given Sunday, and that Big Boy Caprice could win the Triple Crown of acting. Is it Al Roker, Al Pacino, or Al B. Sure?
Pacino.
Yes.
Yeah, I may have screwed up the writing of that question. It's entirely possible.
It happens.
There's one too many ons in that sentence. So. It was supposed to say this actor showed us that a tiger can't, because that was Pacino's break onto Broadway. Does a tiger wear a necktie?
Necktie, right.
So anyway, So there's that.
Typos. It happened. All right. Question number 4. This actress showed us that a cat on a hot tin roof can become a spider, a black widow, in fact. Is it A, Haley Atwell? Wow. Look, it's contagious, Tim. B, Brie Larson, or C, Scarlett Johansson?
Scarlett Johansson.
Correct.
Very good. All right, you are 4 for 4, so that gets you the mug and the book.
Awesome.
And this actor debuted on Broadway in 1957 and won a Tony for his role, The Great White Hope, and eventually became the best father to his twin on-screen children, Luke and Leia. Was it James Earl Jones, John Wayne, or Kirk Douglas?
James Earl Jones.
Yes. Very good. 5 for 5, my good
Now you
man.
get 2 books.
Very cool. Awesome. And a mug.
And a mug.
Yeah, and a mug. So we'll get So after we're done here today, we'll get your shipping information so we can send those off to you. Okay.
Great.
And Michael, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Where can listeners go to find out more about you and what you're doing now?
Well, I have an Instagram page that's, I really should remember what these handles are. I think Instagram is at Michael Cerverus, I believe. The icon is a little cow jumping in the air. So if you find that, you find me. And I also have a Facebook page. I have a couple of Facebook pages. One is just me, and one is Michael Cerverus, actor musician, I think. But and I'm a little more active on Instagram than I am on Facebook, and I don't do a lot of Twitter anymore. But also my band Loose Cattle has an Instagram account and a Facebook account as well, and I'm pretty active on those things and keep people apprised of my music stuff there. And there's a website for Loose Cattle, loosecattleband.com is our website there. So
awesome. We are going to make sure that we link all of those in our show description so that our viewers and our listeners can check them out.
And the next place that you're going to be able to see me any places on a new series for HBO called The Gilded Age, which is Julian Fellowes' new series for HBO that starts in January, end of January. And it's kind of a Downton Abbey in 1880s America, with a cavalcade of stars and people that you'll recognize and stuff. And it should be a really cool series. So that's the next place I'll be appearing on screen. You
said Downton Abbey and 1880s America, and I'm in.
Yeah,
got it.
My wife will absolutely eat it up.
What was that called again?
The Gilded Age.
All right.
I am all for historical dramas, so yes,
oh,
please.
Well, you are gonna have I got the show for you.
I'm so excited.
All right, guys. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, we're going to encourage you to do it right now. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's the most important thing you can do to help our show out, and it helps us to get more amazing guests like Michael Cerverus here today to have these funny moments and these conversations for you to be able to listen to. So please subscribe. It's going to help far more than we can ever tell you. And be sure to check out Michael's work as well. He's got an amazing list of shows, whether you're into Broadway, whether you're into sci-fi, whether you're into straight up regular acting and all these other great things. He does all regular acting, you know what I mean? Anyway, but it's really good stuff. Don't miss out on it.
Irregular acting too.
There's some irregular, sure. So, but check out Michael's work as well. You will not be disappointed. But for any reason, if you were disappointed with the content of our show today, please feel free to lodge a complaint with the head of our complaint department. Ramses IV. Sure, he thinks he's busy with running his pyramid gang and trying to avoid the terror and miss Lent, but don't forget that he also has a slew of guys in his pyramid gang, like Frank, to carry out his bidding. Plus, if it's going to make him look better, he's going to handle the offending party even sooner.
Well, thanks again, Michael.
Thanks, Blade. Thank you all so much.
All right. Goodbye, everybody,
Thanks.
and thanks for watching.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirts Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 4. He'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and joins Ramses IV in keeping the city and the streets safe from the Tick and Arthur, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back, and what's left of his right thorax.
And speaking of sponsors and show partners, check out this short video from our good friends over at Level Up Lightsabers. Information about Level Up Lightsabers and their online training sessions can be found in the episode description below.
On behalf of the rest of the hosts of Funny Science Fiction, we'd like to thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to be a guest on one of our future episodes, please contact us by means of our Facebook group, Funny Science Fiction. You can find us on Twitter or Instagram using the handle @FunnySci-Fi, or you can go to DraytonAllen.com and click the Contact Me link at the bottom of the page. Thanks again. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Copyright 2020 by Drayton Allen. Original music by Jordan Michaels. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation of or by Funny Science Fiction or its sponsors. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at DraytonAllen@DraytonAllen.com.